Morning. Several months ago, you may recall that Clark had invited anyone in the congregation who was willing to provide a faith moment on the last Sunday of each month during the period which we have no regular minister. I thought about it sitting in the pew, and afterwards I went to Clark and said, you know, while I was at Catawba in various capacities, I spoke at over 40 UCC churches from New Hampshire to Florida and almost every place in between. And maybe among all those messages, I can find one that would be appropriate. And then he threw me a curve. He called one day and said, Fred, is there any way you could speak on Father's Day rather than on the last Sunday? Well, I'd never spoken on Father's Day. I had no notes. I had no files. So with a little bit of trepidation, I said, Clark, I'll be glad to. One would think that Father's Day would be one of the easiest times or the easiest Sundays to prepare some remarks. For me, I had such a wonderful father, and one that changed my life and continues to change it. If I just talked about my dad, I might get emotional, and I might not be able to continue. But as it was, he lost his life in a wreck not 300 yards from where we sit. And he and his father and his father's father are buried about 200 yards in this direction. So I feel a close tie to this place, even though I'm not a native member of Mount Zion. My mother and dad were both raised in this church, both baptized in this church before the fire, and when the little branch church or the mission church opened up in Landis in 1918. So I had to think really hard about how I could weave all this together. Excuse my change of glasses, but after my recent illness, I've lost my ability to see and to hear. Again, my idea of fatherhood was born as a young person. And most of you might remember, or many of you might remember, when everybody on Father's Day and on Mother's Day would wear a flower in their lapel. A white one if your mother or father was deceased, or a red one if they were still living. And I can remember on Father's Day leaving our house on South Zion and driving up to my grandfather Alexander's house on South Main to pick a little bouquet of lilies of the valley, which was a gift to my grandfather Alexander from Roy Leinbach, a former pastor at our church in Landis. And Roy Leinbach's brought those down from his father's garden in Pennsylvania. And Tommy tells me that his sister, or his sister-in-law, is still cultivating that patch of lilies of the valley. So, getting back to where I'm supposed to be speaking about. I had a touch of reality creep into my life in the winter of 1961. I found myself as a green U.S. Army Reserve recruit serving with my unit in Fort Polk, Louisiana. Our unit, the 991st Transportation Company, had been activated by President John Kennedy in response to the Russians building the Berlin Wall. It turned out to be a 10-month active duty deployment that turned our members' lives upside down, because unlike the regular Army, this unit had to be transported by the personnel, the equipment, and everything else, lock, stock, and barrel, from Salisbury to Fort Polk, Louisiana. Everybody had to leave their jobs, their families, and all their roots to come face to face with the communists in Berlin. With that expectation, morale in the unit was very high, with a strong sense of patriotism among the members who couldn't wait to face down the commies over the Berlin Wall. Incidentally, Jerry Freeze joined that unit, but he missed out on the fun in Fort Polk and all the armadillos and tarantulas and coral snakes and swamps and mosquitoes. But it was a pretty different life from what we were used to. Far from being sent to Germany as we expected, we spent 10 long months in this mosquito-infested, mud-clogged, 100% humidity atmosphere, with the closest sign of civilization being the little town of Leesville. The town had more bars than churches, more tattoo shops and pawn shops than anything else. Our company wasn't at full strength, so when we arrived at Fort Polk, the Department of Defense filled out our roster with what we were called fillers, a motley assortment of men from all over the Southeast with various levels of education, military experience, and morality. The two most infamous of these fillers were a pair of roughnecks, Snake and Baker. Scary doesn't come close to describing these two guys. Both slept with a long dagger-like knife under their pillows, and pity the poor guy that had to wake him for KP, because Snake had already told everybody in the unit, "Don't touch me." And more than once, I've seen him pull that dagger from his fatigue jacket and say, "Don't touch me." And he meant it. What does all this have to do with Father's Day? It's a very thin thread, but if you will be patient, I'll try to weave it all together. One of the fillers was a meek, shy young farm boy from Arkansas. He was the polar opposite of Snake and Baker. He spoke only when spoken to, staying to himself, and cowering when anybody of authority approached him. I tried very hard to crack that shell that seemed to he have built around himself, but seldom got a response. As the year wore on, some of us who had been raised in the church found a church in Alexandria, a Presbyterian church that we would drive up 45 miles, or 45 minutes, I should say, on Sunday morning to attend the church. And two of the guys were David Jordan, who later became the president of the Savings and Loan in Salisbury, and Bob Kimball. Bob just recently died, but he was a longtime employee of Cannon Mills. From time to time, we would invite other members to ride with us. But in June, we were nearing the end of our deployment, I invited this young guy from Arkansas to ride with me to the church, saying that it was Father's Day, a day that meant a lot to me since I hadn't seen my dad in 4 months. At that point, he started to sob. I reached out to touch his shoulder to comfort him, but he jerked away. He turned his back on me and sat down in the dirt, sobbing uncontrollably. I was taken aback and didn't have any idea what I could do or say to comfort him. And it was getting late. I already had on my Army suntans, the tan-colored uniform that you wear on more formal occasions. He was in his olive drab fatigues. But I said, don't don't worry about that. Come on with me, and if for no other, you need a change of scenery. And we'll stop back on the way back and get a Big Mac. At that, his eyes lit up, and I sensed we had an opening. When we were about 15 minutes away from the church, I decided to try to probe his family situation. So I asked him to tell me about his family, his parents, and his siblings. He clammed up again, so I let him take his time. After a while, he told me about his mother, whom he described in very reverential terms. He especially missed his mother's cooking, whom he described some of his favorites. It reminded me of my own mom's cooking, describing what we would call rib-sticking food. He was especially close to his older brother, who was now serving his second tour of duty in Vietnam. It was he who had suggested that his younger brother drop out of school and join the Army. His younger sister was still in middle school, and his older sister had dropped out of high school to raise her infant baby. Then he turned the volume up. When the old man gets drunk, he beats Mama. I've had to get her to the hospital more than one time. He raped my oldest sister and got her pregnant. That's when Mama ran him out of the house with a shotgun. That was the last time I ever saw him. You call that a daddy? At that point, I told myself there was not much use going to the Father's Day service because he would have a hard time relating. I pulled into the first McDonald's we came to, and it was probably the only one in Alexandria, and got a table in the far corner where we could be alone. As soon as he had wolfed down 2 Big Macs with a double order of fries, the young man had relaxed and seemed ready to talk some more, so I let him take the lead. Even though his mother was working 2 minimum wage jobs, he was sending her his entire pay check each month. And for a private at that time, and I was a private, that's $77 a month. That's why I never saw him at the PX getting snacks or a beer. The drive back to Fourth Pope that day was a lot more relaxed. He chatted about his Army life and how he would like nothing more than to join his brother's unit in Vietnam. We agreed to stay in touch, and I told him that the invitation to go to church was good as long as he was willing. A few weeks later, he came to my barracks on Saturday morning, to say he wanted to go with me the next day. And he did. He was quiet throughout the service and did his best to follow along in the singing the hymns and bowing his head during the prayers. It wasn't much longer after that our unit was finished at Fort Polk, and we were sent back to the base in Salisbury. And I lost touch with him, even though I tried through the DOD to find out how to get in touch with him. The curtain came down, and I couldn't get anybody to share with me his information. My greatest fear has always been that he might lie in an unmarked grave somewhere in the swamps and jungles of Vietnam, or return to the States in a flag-draped coffin. I owe that young man a debt of gratitude for bringing my vision of fatherhood, giving it a bitter dose of reality. Coming from the insularity of the small town of Landis and having lived a sheltered life of comfort and privilege, he led me to see the uglier side of life that all too many of our fellow citizens cannot escape. Having had a father, but I always called him Daddy, who was the ideal of a dad, his model has been in my forefront as I experienced the joy of fatherhood 5 times. There's no way I could fill his shoes, but God knows I have tried. Added to his inspiration is the quiet but meaningful lesson taught to me by the shy, humble young man from Arkansas. And wherever he might be now, I wish him peace and an abiding relationship with his Father, God the Father. May the road rise to meet your feet. May the sun fall softly on your face, and the winds be always at your back. And until we meet again, may the Lord hold you in the palm of his hand. Amen.